This is Shellee Howard with Parents Is Your Teen College Ready? And today I have a wonderful guest I can't wait to share with you, Cynthia Kofel. Welcome to the show.
No, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Outstanding. Well, Cynthia, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself so they have a little bit of background and knowledge about the conversation today?
Sure. I was a public educator for 31 years. So I was a special education teacher for six, and I was a school counselor for 25 years. And then I decided I just want to work with teens the way I want to work with them. And so I created an online business where I am a coach for teens, and I also have college students who have anxiety. And we work through how to manage anxiety. And that's what I do now in my home business. And I've had that for 2 years.
I love it. And for listeners who haven't maybe, heard my spiel, I just wanted to share a little bit about College Ready, and then we're going to get into our time together. So College Ready was started 17 years ago when my firstborn came home from 8th grade and said, "Mom, I know exactly what I want to do." And I was shocked. I had changed my major 5 times. And he was very simplistic and I want to be a brain surgeon. Can you help me? Oh, and by the way, Mom, I want to go to one of those top Ivy League schools. Can you do that? And I was like, yes, I can. I'm your mom. Moms can do anything. And long story short, he got 7 full ride offers. He was got a full ride to USC and Harvard matched it. So Harvard, he spent 4 years pre-med, went on, graduated with zero debt, went on to UC San Diego Medical School, and he's now an orthopedic surgeon at UCLA at 30 years old. So he was my why I switched from the career that I had, because when he graduated, when he walked across the stage at Harvard and handed me his diploma, he's like, "Mom, we did it. You need to write a book to help other people do it." And so I did.
Oh,
And
wow.
then College Ready was birthed at the same time. So those are some juicy things we're going to talk about today, listeners. And let's go ahead and jump right in, Cynthia. Can you help me understand the difference between what you offer and what therapy might provide for our family?
That's a good question. What I do is I take the teen where they are, or the young adult where they are right now, and then we work on what do you need to do to get to those future goals. So we do a lot of assessing of where you are now, where are the problems, what kind of obstacles might come up, and then we plan through them. Therapy and therapy is very much needed. And sometimes I'm working with a client who is in therapy and sees me. So my program works really well alongside therapy if someone's doing it. But therapy goes back and looks at past things that have happened. Maybe there's just underlying things that need to be uncovered or taken care of before they can get on to that best life. And so I kind of see what I do is just taking a really maybe not high functioning child, but a child that's functioning fairly well and helping them to function better. And so that's kind of what it looks like. And because I'm working with anxiety, if they do have a diagnosis of anxiety and they're taking medication, of course they have to be being managed by a doctor or a therapist because that's where they would get their medication or any help with the diagnosis of that. But I just help with managing that, learning different techniques to do that, and moving on to new goals.
Wow, that opens up a lot of questions for me. But the first one I have to ask is, how do I even know if my child has anxiety?
Well, everyone has anxiety. And so that's the tricky part because not everyone has diagnosable anxiety, but everyone has anxious moments about things that are new and different. And college is one of those things, or just anything that's new, like the beginning of a school year, or going into a new class, or learning an instrument for the first time, or driving. There's so many things that we are doing for the first time through that teenage, young adult time. And of course, we need to normalize that everyone has anxious moments and even be role modeling about, oh, I'm feeling anxious as the parent, saying that to your child. And here's what I'm doing to feel better about it, or here's how I'm managing it. But when we know that it's a problem, we know they're wanting to do something like try a new instrument, drive, date, go to college, and yet we see them not doing that because they are too afraid or the anxiety is getting in the way of them doing things. And certainly if they're not doing like what we would consider daily functioning things like getting up and going to school or going to their job or going to their activities, if their life is disrupted in some way or your home life is disrupted a lot by anxiety behaviors, then that's when you need to at least be assessed to see what is exactly going on.
Absolutely. So we have, I've helped students for the last 17 years. I speak teenager. I love teenagers. And one thing I do know that definitely drives anxiety is test taking. The
Hmm.
SAT, the ACT, the PSAT, the AP, I can go on and on and on.
Yes.
And that is a real thing. And so I help families understand that if a student has a high GPA and a low test score, that is a concern for college because
Hmm.
they're like, you have to test when you get here. It may be
Hmm.
optional to get in right now, but it still is something you have to learn the skill.
Hmm.
So my second child had massive test anxiety, and I thought I tried everything, but I would love to hear how you could help that child, or maybe, some ways parents can understand why their test score doesn't match their GPA and what can they do to handle that because it's not over when they finish high school. So
Right.
how do you address test anxiety?
Well, a part of my program talks a lot to them about normalizing anxiety. Of course, I'm anxious about this test. A lot of those are high stakes tests. Those are going to decide scholarships and decide what you're going to, what level you're going to go in at or whatever. And so, of course, you're going to be anxious about that. I think a lot of times anxiety gets the best of us when we're trying to fight against it or we're resisting it or we're mad at it and of course, the kids are because they don't want to feel that way. It feels terrible to be anxious. We all know what that feels like in our body. So I teach a lot about allowing that feeling to be there, that uncomfortableness buzzing around. And if we give it space and we allow it to do that movement around and feel uncomfortable for a little bit, it's going to actually move through our body. But when we're fighting it and we're clamping up around it and trying to get it to go away, that actually makes it worse. So that's a little bit like just that talking ahead of time. And also, when we are really prepared for things, we're not as anxious about them. So, preparing, like practice testing, and maybe if you're going to be testing in an environment you've never been to before, is there any way you can go to that environment ahead of time just to see what it looks like? I know my anxiety is lessened many times when I can imagine the room and I can imagine, okay, there I'm sitting there and I'm taking the test and it just makes me feel better before I go. So if there's any way you can see it, but sometimes you can't, but if you can just everything you can do to prepare for it ahead of time. And then I also talk about getting grounded in the present because when we are in our present self, then anxiety doesn't have a lot of room because anxiety is about worrying about the past things that happened or worrying about your outcome of the test or like what's going to happen later. So if you're thinking about right now I'm safe. Right now I'm doing fine. And then in order to be able to get grounded, we just have to use our five senses. So I tell them when you go into the testing center, what does the door feel like when you're opening the door to go in? What sounds are you hearing around you? What does it smell like in there? Like everything that you can do to bring yourself into the right now and just like those deep breaths because if you're breathing deep and slow, your body has to calm down. It can't stay in a heightened state if you are really doing deep breaths. So, deep breaths are easy to do. No one knows what you're doing. And you can be doing that as you're getting prepared to sit down to take that test. So, all of those kinds of things. So, you have to do stuff ahead of time, like the preparing for it. But then there's a lot of stuff the day of and walking in that you can do.
Wow, that it's so helpful. It seems so simplistic that I think that's why a lot of us skip over. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, just calm yourself down. But I do remember telling my daughter, like, I would watch her test prep for hours and she'd take the test and she'd come home and she said, I bombed it. And I'm like,
Mhm.
how is that even possible? She goes, Mom, when I sat down, my brain flipped off.
Mhm.
It left me
Mhm.
and my heart was racing and so on and so forth. And so I love that you teach them these skills that are life skills
Mhm.
that they can carry with them now and in the future. We add a few things to that as well, where we tell students, if you have the score, we can tell any student, here's the test score you need to get into your dream school, whatever that may be. So now they have a measurable goal. They can visualize that. Now they need to take a practice test and get that score so they can see they can do it,
Mhm.
which brings down that anxiety.
Yeah.
And then actually lay everything out or put it in the car, the pencil,
Mhm.
the calculator, so in the morning they're not all over the place and
Mhm.
have GPS set, direction set. So what you say is what I say.
Mhm.
What a beautiful thing. I love that.
Yes. Well, and when you're talking about your brain just sort of blanks, that that is by design. Like we when we are in an anxious state, when our body is alarmed, part of our brain actually does shut down because if we're in a life or death situation, which is what our body thinks at that time, even though we're not life or death in a test, but our body thinks that. And so our body just thinks, "Oh, this is a time when they need to not think and just go." And so that's when the brain gets turned off. And that's why there, it's like I can't access this information. And that's why it's so important to keep your body in a regulated state because then your brain can stay online, which then has access to the information.
Wow. I just told her I don't get it.
Well, I don't get it either. I'm a good test taker, but I know that that can be a problem.
So parents out there listening, if your child has test anxiety, it is a real thing. It took me a bit to understand. My firstborn is gifted. He sees it, it's over. He just has a photographic memory. So testing was super easy. So when my second born came to me and said, Mom, I am studying. I thought maybe she wasn't studying to her full potential. And I did everything I could with the right test prep and giving her all the resources. But the one thing I didn't lean into is your anxiety is real
Hmm.
because I didn't know how I could help her. So having you as a resource, outstanding. I love it. I love it. Let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about how your program is different from other programs.
Well, I was trained to do the UMAP assessment probably a year ago. And when I started working with anxiety, it was mostly just like this feeling the feelings and reframing our thoughts and preparing for things and making plans for anxiety. But when I got trained to do the UMAP assessment, I saw a really good opportunity to add this into what I'm doing. So the UMAP assessment is 4 assessments in one, and it creates a profile, but it shows my clients what their top 5 strengths are, and it uses Clifton strengths, which I think is fun because that's already a very reputable strengths measure. So they learn what their top 5 strengths are, they learn what their values are, their preferred versus burnout skills, and then also their personality or interests. And so, even though if they have a future planning, like if they have a lot of anxiety over the future and like where will I go to school and what will I study, we use
Mhm.
that information to help decide those things as well. But I use the strengths a lot just to show them that these strengths can be used in every area of your life and you can use them to manage anxiety. And if we have a good why, which is their values, of why do we want to manage our anxiety? Like if somebody has a value of adventure
Mhm.
and they're staying in their house all the time because they are anxious, then they're not valuing that adventure piece of them. And so we talk about because adventure is a value of yours, then we need to figure out a way to get past the uncertainty, get past the worrying about what happens when I go outside because you want to be adventurous because our values when we're living in alignment with our values, that's when we're our happiest and when we're our most successful. And so I talk to them a lot about how to use those things. So I don't think there's a lot of anxiety programs that use strengths and values and interests, and because I was a school counselor, I love kind of that future planning piece. And so if they have anxiety around that future planning, which a lot of them do, then we just kind of add that into it. So I think that's what maybe makes my program different, and my 31 years of experience of working with young people, which lots of people are great with working with young people, but I think the more experience you have, you just kind of talk their language, like what you were saying.
I love that. The first thing we do in our program is similar. We start with their core values, their gifts, their talents, their advocacy. The thing we do a little bit different is we help them to build a passion with purpose project where
Mm,
they get to lean into, here's my passion. That is what I want to see changed in the world. So they get to test out those skills to see, do I like people? Do I not?
mhm,
And gently, serve another person because the focus is then taken off of them and put on somebody else. So I love the future planning piece
mhm.
because at least with the students that I get to support, it's their massive anxiety.
Yeah.
It truly is. I mean, other than the social media always in front of them and never being good enough, that's the other one.
Mm, right.
And that's what I want to switch to next. So for those parents who are like, okay, my kid was fine until they got a cell phone and a computer, and now they're having all this massive anxiety. Can you help that child?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's lots you can teach about that. I don't think that young people realize the impact that cell phones have had on them. I am still learning about it. I watched Jonathan Haidt, I think his last name is Haidt. Jonathan, it's Haight or something like that. But he wrote that at the book Anxious Generation. I think that's the name of it. I watched a webinar that he did, and he totally convinced me that the cell phone is the reason for anxiety. Because as a school counselor, I was seeing anxiety way before the pandemic. A lot of people blame the pandemic on the anxiety increase in young people. And I kept thinking, no, I saw it before, but I couldn't pinpoint why I saw it before. Like why was it going up before we had the pandemic? And he has data points and charts to show that as soon as the smartphone became very widely used in 2012, it's almost like a straight up line from that year that anxiety in teens went up, and all sorts of other mental health issues, even suicidality and all of those things that we don't want for our kids. And he talked a lot about why that is. And as he talked about it, I thought, oh my gosh, I saw all this happening before my eyes and I didn't understand it because the millennials had cell phones, but they had flip phones and they
Mm,
couldn't just get access to a whole bunch of stuff. Texts you had to pay for. And what did he call it? I think it's like the front facing phone or camera, but they could only take a picture away. They
yeah.
couldn't see. And all of this has to do with anxiety and their mental health. And I'm like completely fascinated by it. So, yes, I can help because I understand that now and I talk to my clients about that. But that's a trickier one because if they've had full access to a cell phone, it's very hard to get them to stop doing that. I mean, I think if they understand and their parents maybe have been putting some parameters on it, I've seen kids be able to successfully use their cell phones without getting involved in all this mental health problem. But that's with boundaries that they're putting on themselves and then boundaries that their parents are putting on them as well.
Mm. So important, right?
Yeah.
Now when I go, I'm very observant and I'll go out to dinner and I'll see four people at a table and they're all on their cell phone.
Mhm.
And so I always tell students, if you're looking for a job forever, chiropractic, because everybody's necks are going to be like totally a mess.
Yes.
And the eyeglasses and stuff because of all of that light coming in.
Hmm.
In all sincerity, it is a normal thing now that these kids are always seeking and learning. And I look at it, it's a double-edged sword. You have access to everything you need, which
Right.
is really cool, except for now that AI is here, kids are using it to write essays for college.
Mm.
And we have an AI tracker that we're able to run their essay through. And it is super hard to talk to a student and a parent about your child just used AI and they were caught. So these technologies can be
Mhm.
brilliant and they can
Yes.
also be very, very stressful. So parents,
Mhm.
I'm right there with you. I'm concerned for all of that generation, but I
Mhm.
know if we can help them to use it well, right?
Yes.
We use test prep apps. I mean, there's really cool stuff that we can do for them.
Mhm.
But what about that child who is a little bit more resistant to seeing you? What about
Mm.
the one who is like, I'm fine?
Mhm. Which is probably most. I don't think I've had a client that originally said, "Hey, I want to work with Cynthia Kofel." Like a lot of them, the parents are finding me and then they're talking their kids into it. I I just suggest to parents, I do a free consult for the parents, but I will also do a second free consult for an hour with the child alone. And I let them decide. Like, let's chat, let's talk, let's see if we can create a connection. And because I have all this experience working with teens and I do talk teen language and I sometimes feel like I'm like secretly a teenager in my brain. So I feel like that's part of why I totally get it. But I don't have trouble like making those connections. And so if we can just get them on the call and just have them try it. Now, and if they don't, if they're like, that's not a good connection for me, and of course I couldn't connect 100% with every kid on the earth, but I don't usually have trouble with that. So if you can just talk them into doing that 1 hour just talking with me, and I just usually talk about whatever they want to talk about, what things are getting in the way of the things that you want to do. Now, if they don't think there's anything at all wrong with their life, which I doubt that to be totally true, but if they really don't believe there's anything wrong, then they aren't going to they don't have a why to work on this. But
Mhm.
I'm guessing most teens do think something's wrong. Maybe they just don't want to admit it to their parents, or maybe they don't. I think a lot of the people that are going to work with me, they just think, oh, is she just like my parent? Or is she going to tell my parent what I say? And
Mhm.
I do summarize things for parents, and of course parents know what I'm working on with their child, but I ask the client first, what do you want me to share? If they're talking about romantic interests or, friend problems or teachers they hate or, like all of that, or maybe they're mad at their parents. If those are the things that they're wanting to talk about, I say, what can I share about this with your parent? Or can I share any of this? But there's always stuff I can share. And very rarely do kids not want me to share anything. Sometimes they're like, well, don't tell them that I'm mad at them or don't tell them that I think they're weird or whatever. And I don't do that part of it. But so I think just giving them, if they just give me a chance to visit just for that hour, it's almost always a go.
And trying to get them to do something they don't want to do anyway is
Mhm.
always an uphill battle. I I often, when I'm working with the teenagers, find out that they just didn't know what they were going to talk about, and the
Yeah.
unknown brought them
Yes.
anxiety.
Hmm.
And so you're just like I am in the fact of when they figure out we're here to help them and support them, they absolutely see the value. And
Hmm.
once they see the value, their why is like, I have somebody on my team. I'm not
Hmm.
in this alone. And
Hmm.
as a parent, we all want to be that go-to person. Let's be honest. Like at least I did.
Yeah.
I know my fourth, my stepdaughter, I had to pay one of my consultants to tell her what I would tell her
Uh-huh.
because as stepmom, it was not being received the way that I would have liked it.
Hmm.
So there's some beauty in that gentle approach you're taking. I think it's super valuable.
Hmm. I've often thought about using the tagline, a voice your teen will listen to, or a voice your teen will hear, because I am saying the same things that their parents are saying almost always. And it's just different. I don't have an agenda. I love them and care about what happens to them, but I don't, the parent, of course, I'm a parent. I have an agenda for my kids. And it's just different because if they don't go to college, but their parent wants them to, that's not the end of the world for me. I'm just going to talk to them about, why they want to do that or not do that. So it is different for them.
I totally agree. I mean, we've had some conversations that had nothing to do with college whatsoever,
Mhm.
but they wanted to know, hey, how will this affect my chances in my future career,
Yeah.
whatever that may be? I think having a village to surround these young people is so important. And that's why I wanted to share with my audience. So I am so grateful for your help. Is there any last words of encouragement or thoughts that you would want to share?
I really think that kids always figure it out. I mean, I know that there's, terrible stories out there where kids don't figure it out. And I think that's parents' biggest fear. That was one of my biggest fears. If my kids weren't doing what I thought they should be doing, then, oh, they're going to be homeless on the streets or they're going to be a criminal or they're going to, I don't know, all the worst case scenarios that you can think of. But in all the years that I worked with kids, and maybe they weren't doing very well in high school, maybe they were even failing, and I even had some that dropped out. But almost always there's something later, like they just needed to mature or they just needed to have some kind of life experience that changed their thinking and they turn out okay. And
Mm.
I just think if we just kind of allow ourselves to think they're going to be okay, they're going to be okay, then it takes away some of that fear of, I just have to control all this stuff because I don't want anything, I don't want them to have a terrible life or I don't want them to be homeless or, on the streets or whatever. And I just don't, I've very rarely ever seen that happen for real. Like it's a fear of everyone, but then they figure it out and they become very successful people.
That's so beautiful. And it's inspiring, right?
Mhm.
Is there anything that you wanted to talk about college ready? Any questions that your clients might have?
I definitely do because I had tons of these questions before. I wish I knew you 17 years ago for not only my own children, but just to be able to ask you some of these questions. But parents that I have now want to know when should their child be getting ready for college? Like what's the time frame? Is it freshman year? When is it that they should get started? So what do you tell your families about that?
It's interesting. A lot of it has to do with culture. A lot of it has to do with parents' expectations. I've had parents who have gotten pregnant and called me concerned about where their child will go to school and how they should navigate that whole path. Really, what I tell families is teach your child to love to read.
Mm,
Love of reading will help them all the way through life. So, speaking of technology, instead of you always being on your phone and they want to mimic you, I tell parents when they're little, put your phone inside a book. And even if, they're next to you playing, they see you with an open book and they're
mm-hmm,
like, I want a book.
mm-hmm,
It's really a monkey see, monkey do. Now, when it really starts to ramp up is right around middle school, right? So fifth and sixth, they're starting to think about, I'm gifted in this area and I'm struggling in this area. That they're starting to learn who they are and the things they come with. But when it really matters is in eighth grade, because
mm,
those eighth grade classes, if they're not prepared for high school, they're going to put going down one wrong path because they just didn't know. And I always tell the example of my son took Spanish in middle school, and then his high school counselor said he needed to take Spanish all over again.
mm,
It was so, right? It was so counterintuitive to me. It's like, well, why if he's already taken Spanish? That was just the way that high school plan worked.
mm-hmm,
And that was the difference of him being salutatorian versus valedictorian. So that one class made such an impact. Now, is that a big deal through life? Not at all. But you can see with that example, starting sooner and having the plan that can
Mm-hmm.
pivot is so much better than waiting. On the
Mm-hmm.
financial side, it's critical because the FAFSA looks at the second semester of the sophomore year and the first semester of the junior year. So if you want scholarships and you want the big money, you need to get your family's financial house in college planning order
Mm,
because the FAFSA looks at some things and they don't look at other things. Ethical, legal, they tell you what they're going to look at, but it would be so wise to do that before you have to complete the FAFSA. So
mm-hmm.
really middle school on, and it's truly never too late. Unfortunately, it gets harder and harder and harder the longer you wait. But it's same with retirement. If you don't save until you're 80, retirement's not going to be fun. So we like families to understand if you start doing college tours like you would tour a museum or a park or and just make it a fun environment,
Mm-hmm.
that's all we're talking about. It's that open, gentle discussion about maybe your PG version of your college days, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you remember that was so important.
Mm-hmm.
So planning and going at it gently is really the best path that I found over the last 17 years.
That's great advice. Well, you were talking about the finances, and every parent wants to know how in the world do we do this debt free, or can we even do this debt free? And you mentioned in your story that your son did do it debt free in going to Harvard, which is such an expensive school. And I, even as a school counselor, don't understand all these finances things. So, how do you do that?
And that's such a beautiful question. Unfortunately, it has to be done by students. So I'll explain. So everybody's finances are different and every student's abilities are different. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the first hardest part. So
Mm-hmm.
the number one thing that will affect the cost of college is the lack of planning. So
Mm.
my second book is being released this week called
Oh.
College Admissions Simplified, where I simplify and I give a plan that if the family follows the plan, they can graduate without debt. So it's exactly what you're asking because over the last 17 years, everybody wants to know. When my son got a full ride to USC and Harvard matched it, everybody's like, but Harvard doesn't give merit scholarships. Well, it wasn't, it was a financial negotiation.
Mm.
And people are like, what? You can negotiate with college? College is a business. You have to remember, they need your dollar to stay open. They
Mm-hmm.
need your student to graduate from their college and be a productive citizen with the diploma on their wall. It is
Mm.
all a business. So why would, I mean, except in California, most people would not pay full price for a home, right? They typically, you would negotiate a price, you would drive
Mm-hmm.
down the price, and you would have comparables. That's all this is.
Mm.
So you take the comparables, you have a strategy and a plan, you pick the right colleges, you help your child be the most successful they can be, which, oh, by the way, is the right thing to do. And
Mm-hmm.
that is not pushing them to take 20 APs. It's helping
Mm-hmm.
them to navigate a very balanced life. I remember my son saying to me, Mom, all my friends are freaking out and this is really easy. Am I doing something wrong?
Mm.
And I said, no, we've been working on it since you were in middle school and you don't even know what you're doing, but you are planning for college.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge eye opener for me, is because his norm was what other kids are reeling from because they truly are just deer in headlights. They're scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
It is possible. We have students do it all the time. Last year, our students, we had, I think it was 29 seniors graduate with 9.3 million in scholarships.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. I love it.
That's important. And like you said, as a high school counselor, you don't know the family's finances.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that you really don't get to talk about because
Right.
that's not an opportunity that you get to observe.
Mm-hmm.
You have the beautiful gift of meeting with the students,
Hmm.
But the financial side of things, how would you even know if it's a need-based family or a family who doesn't just want to write a big check for a university?
Right. And there are both, definitely. Because I remember, even though I didn't know their finances, you can sometimes tell, or sometimes they would say something about it during the college process. Well, so how does College Ready help those families through this process? Like, what does your program do to help the parents go through this?
So the program is there's not one other program like it in the world. Because when everybody kept asking me what it took to get my son first accepted to Harvard and then to do it without debt, there was nothing there were no resources available to me. There were people like his high school counselor who was wonderful, but she just kept telling me, he's got all A's, he's doing great, leave him alone. Like
Hmm.
that was the
Yeah.
strategy, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
dealing with kids who are not showing up for school. And so as helpful and as wonderful as that may have sounded, it was hard for us thinking, how are we going to compete?
Mhm.
Right? My son's like, I want to be a brain surgeon and go to an Ivy League school. And she's saying, oh, you're fine. So then we stepped it up to the next level and we're like, okay, what is this need? And I built him as I build businesses. So I'm 7-time entrepreneur. I've started 7 businesses. And so I took his want of an Ivy League education pre-med and I reverse engineered it.
Mm.
So that's what we do with each child. We figure out what is their academic plan? What is their testing strategy? How will they show colleges they have leadership? How will they step into passion with a purpose so they can talk about their compassion and empathy? We help students balance life and school, right? Extracurriculars. These kids are doing multi sports and theaters. And I know I felt like a taxi cab, right? So we have to help them to understand that doing a zillion things is not what colleges are looking for. They're
Mhm.
looking for depth and breadth, and they're looking for who is that child.
Mhm.
Then we help them to really put a resume together for letters of recommendation. We have essay editors that help them polish, not write, help them polish their essays, application reviewers, then we help the family get their financial house in order, help them understand where the big scholarships are, and that's what it takes. So it's
Mhm.
not easy, and not everybody may want to do it.
Mhm.
But for those of you who do, it is possible. And I just want to encourage you to either, go to our website, get free resources, attend our free webinars. If you are like, hey, I'm a busy parent, I just want somebody to do this, tag your it me to help you with that. But
Mhm.
our goal is to help 1 million families. And that is why I wrote my second book, is because in the 7 years since my first book became a bestseller, so much changed
Wow.
in just 7 years. So even if you're a parent who went to college, guess what? It's not at all like it used to
Mhm.
be.
Mhm. Well, I feel like it changed. I haven't been in the high school now for 2 years, and I feel like it's already different in just those 2 years since I left, and also I'm not around it as much, so I kind of lost some of those things that I remembered about what to do. But that is amazing. I love what you're doing, and I'm definitely gonna let my audience know about your books and how to get to them and how to get to you and your free resources, because I know a lot of my families want this information, and I think it's great, and I wish I would have known about it years ago. So I'm glad I got to meet you.
It has been my pleasure. And parents, for those of you still listening, hopefully
Mhm.
you will see the benefit of having the village of resources around you. So thank you so much, Cynthia, for your time. And parents, until next time, we're so excited to support you.
Thank you.